Running a business comes with a lot of what ifs, but luckily there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Has life ever thrown you a curveball? I've been thrown 1, 2, maybe 3. And okay, if we're being honest, a few more in life. And sometimes you just need a professional to talk with it about. And friends help and family helps, but having a professional therapist has been a game changer for me because of the skills they bring into those conversations. And I want you to have access to that too. So BetterHelp have been willing to give you 10% off your first month if you sign up today with www.betterhelp.com/difference. You deserve to have somebody walking through this with you. You deserve all the healing. And a professional is the kind of person that will not only listen, but they will give you tools to walk through this journey so that you are not alone. www.betterhelp.com/difference to get 10% off your first month today. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. In a world where hustle culture is glorified, burnout is rampant, and leadership often feels disconnected from humanity, Dr. Nona Javid is offering a radical alternative. A neuroscientist turned chiropractor, entrepreneur, and author, she walked away from a thriving 7-figure practice to create a life and a business rooted in alignment, freedom, and purpose. She splits her time between Southern California and Italy, and today she helps leaders rewire their subconscious, regulate their nervous system, and unlock what she calls soul-aligned leadership. From her groundbreaking 1 week per month lifestyle to practical strategies for breaking free from the grind, Dr. Nona is showing us what it looks like to lead with clarity, with vision, and energy that lasts. If you've ever felt the tension between success and fulfillment, and I know many of you have, or wondered if there's a better way to lead without sacrificing your entire well-being, well, then this conversation will shift the way you think about leadership forever. Hello, Nona, and welcome to A World of Difference podcast.
Hi, I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
I'm excited because I just reading about your background and all the things we're going to talk about today, I think that the audience is really going to resonate with so many particular parts of who you are. I think there's a lot of people, because of some of the geopolitical shifts happening and some of the things we're seeing happen even in the economy and the market here in the United States around employment and jobs, there's just been a lot of people rethinking the work that they do, whether it's a forced layoff. We've seen a lot of that here in Silicon Valley, or we're seeing a lot of senior skilled women be ousted from their roles for various reasons. There's some cultural shifts happening that happen on a political level that affect, not just politics, but affect corporations and affect society and academia. And so what used to just be, I guess, isolated to politics, you could stay away from it. Now it sort of affects everything. And we're seeing some of that, globally as well. And so sometimes when those shifts happen that you didn't expect, a lot of curveballs get thrown to you in life, people make choices to do something different. It's an opportunity to self-reflect and say, what do I want going forward? And you've had some moments in your life that have caused some shifts. So I think my first question off the bat is just what led you to walk away from a very successful 7-figure practice? And then how did that particular decision really shape the leader that you are today?
I think I was really at the time, and I think anyone listening to this can relate to this, is I was sort of going through life and being inside of the matrix or inside of the box and checking off all the different things that I felt like I should check off in order to be successful. So whether you're in the corporate world or you're climbing the corporate ladder, or you have your own business or in a nonprofit, doesn't matter the industry. I think there are some standards that we feel we need to stay within, or there are some check boxes that we feel like we need to go through this in order to fit in, or in order to feel worthy, or in order to be productive, in order to be good humans. So all of those things I had been doing for a while since I was a child, really. I was like the people pleaser, the A+ student. And so I went to Berkeley, I studied neurology, got my doctorate. I moved into a new town, started a business, got married, had a couple of children. So I'm checking off all of these things. And I remember just right before I was in my mid-20s, being in that 7-figure business that I was in, and recognizing that all of those things were not truly something that I had been wanting to experience. I was completely burnt out. My marriage wasn't working. My business was just kind of keeping me a slave to itself. And there was a cap and I couldn't really grow. And here I was completely unfulfilled, alone, and burnt out in the process. So that really gave me not just perspective, but I think a new way of thinking. So, you're talking about the changes that are happening, that we're going through right now in our economy, in our political system, everywhere really around the world, but in the Western world, in America right now. I think we can look at them as this is an opportunity for a new way of thinking. Every single time I've had something taken away from me, quote unquote, like, when the economy was bad in 2008, when it crashed, that was when I actually started my very first business. So every time I was in a quote unquote, really poor economic area, I used it and I leveraged it as a way to create something new that was going to work in that environment. I remember I was working for somebody else, and I was just kind of like an associate in that business, and I was an employer in that business, and she wanted to renew the contract because the changes that were happening in the environment then politically also in 2008. And she presented to me with a new contract, and that meant something that I didn't want to experience. And so what that meant for me is the combination of those two things led me into, okay, I'm going to start my own business. And then, of course, later, as I mentioned, I burnt out. And that meant for me that I was going to do something different, or I was going to move into a different way of thinking. And that was really the ripple effect when I did burn out, into creating the goals and the kind of impact that I want to make and the kind of life that I want to live. And ultimately has a ripple effect on the life of people in my life as well, and in the world, and in my community and my family as well. So all of those points of struggle in my personal life, and I think we can, generally speaking, can become the leverage in which we flourish if we choose to do so.
Yeah, I love how when you bring in this whole notion that our career decisions are never decisions that just affect us, especially if, we're parts of families, even whether you're married and have children or not. I mean, especially if you do, because, women, moms, mothers, wives, sisters, daughters, we all contribute to our families, and our families rely on that income, but they also rely on us to be present for them in that relationship, whatever that is. And so, here in Silicon Valley, one of the things that has been kind of a big culture shock for me, and I think it's increasingly this way, is, there's something happening around, with especially in technology, where more and more we're trying to create these superhumans, but that doesn't really exist. And so in the process, it feels as though we're sort of losing our humanity. Like, who are we, and what does it mean to test those human limits? Have you observed that yourself?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is also comes into play when you are in a comparison world, right? Am I comparing myself to AI? I'm going to fail. If I compare myself, back in the day, you only compared yourself to your neighbor, and you probably did okay relative to your neighbor. And then add in social media, you're comparing yourself to all these, whether it's real or not, identities. And then now with AI coming out, now you're comparing yourself with, the abilities that AI has or is going to have. And we're always falling short in business, in our careers. Like you said, there's tons of changes that are happening in the corporate world with the layoffs. I recently heard there's 70%, like the prediction is that 70% layoff across the board in big corporations eventually, maybe not this year, maybe not next year. So we can either lean into that, or I think we can leverage and go, okay, what is needed and what is next, and how can I reinvent myself, and what are some of the things where I can, leverage the fact that these things exist. I can either move into that and go, I'm comparing myself. I'm never good enough. I'm never good enough. My company's never good enough. My impact is never good enough. And sadly, oftentimes it takes a level of isolation and a lot of contemplation, internal contemplation, to determine, okay, what's the direction I would like to take this myself? Where would I like to lead myself? Which, as you mentioned, it means, where do I lead my family? Where do I lead my kids? And where do I lead my community? And ultimately make a change from an inside out perspective.
Yes, I love that whole way you framed it. Something I often say, because of work in talent development, and I've been in a tech company for the last over 2.5 years here in Silicon Valley. And as we've seen this AI revolution start to take place, people often say that whole, will AI take over my job? And that, that's a serious concern. And we are seeing some of that happen in certain roles that are being, now done by AI. And then jobs are transforming, my career and my role is transforming. So it is a natural time for people to reevaluate. But what I do often see is exactly what you said, people comparing themselves to AI. So what I feel like I've said over the past year quite a bit, doing leadership summits globally and training and just in speaking inside conversations with people, is, if we try to outshine the robots, the AI, we're never going to, because they already are outshining us in these particular ways. And so I think it's so important to figure out, like, what is AI not able to do? And there's still some particular parts of that are true. And so those parts are just the really very human parts of who we are. So just be more human centered, learn to be both adaptable and continue to have this learning agility, but increase your self-awareness. What does it mean to be you, uniquely you as a human? Recognizing your human limits. You're not available 24/7 like AI is. And really just be, increasing in your emotional intelligence, your cultural intelligence. I do feel like that is not only research-wise showing to be true, but it also is a way to kind of put things in their boxes. You're the human, let AI be the AI. So I love how you frame that. Next, I kind of want to talk a little bit about this whole notion of neuroscience, our nervous system, and all of that, because that is something that has been very helpful to me. Years ago, I was in a very traumatic, toxic work environment and did some therapy and was in a cohort of people who had been in environments like that to sort of begin to process what happened and how to move forward in a healthier way. And as I did that, I began to be trained and taught by my cohort leader around some of this, things about a parasympathetic nervous system, why triggers are happening, that, your body remembers what happened years ago and suddenly you're feeling as if you're there again, all of that. So how do you see that connection between neuroscience, the nervous system, and effective leadership in these conditions that we're facing?
Yeah, so I think the main foundation with what the nervous system, that it's factual with the nervous system, is that you will always experience what you have experienced in the past. So if you grew up in a family dynamic where there was stress, there was anxiety, or there was a certain dynamic around money, or a certain dynamic around relationships. So whatever has happened in the past, you are likely to experience that over and over again. And to a certain degree, you're also likely to attract people into your life, experiences and events into your life that are going to reaffirm that over and over and over again. So this could be in a personal relationship, this could be in a working relationship, in a working environment, this could be in how you lead your company, this could be, in any dynamic that you think about. Once you become aware of this, so here's the big question. Well, how do I unhook from the ways that if I've experienced this in the past and now I'm being triggered or I'm inviting this environment that is going to reaffirm that, and you're telling me that if my nervous system has experienced something, then it's going to keep experiencing it. Well, that sounds pretty hopeless. Like, how do I unhook from that? And the cool thing about the nervous system is its neuroplasticity, which basically means in order for me to experience something different now than what I have been experiencing as a leader or in a work environment or in a relationship or as a CEO of my company, I will have to experience things differently. All right. Now, you might not have the ability, the physical ability to experience things differently, but what we have, every single one of us, is our thought process and our mindset and our mind's eye. So, what I have my leaders, my entrepreneurs, business owners, anybody that I'm working with, or anyone who's really struggling with those relationships, so that is I go, let's create a scenario, a little mind movie or something that creates that ideal environment of what you would like to experience. So if you'd like to experience a peaceful environment, if you'd like to experience a better dynamic, if you'd like to experience yourself as a better leader, it would be important to actually describe that and give that back to your nervous system. And you do that by, obviously, there's tons of tools out there, but visualization is a very big one. So you create a scenario in which you're actually in a peaceful environment in your work, or you are the next level leader that you would like to experience yourself as. You write it all down. You create the sensory factors around it. What does it smell like? What does it feel like? What is the kinesthetic aspect of it? What are the things that you are hearing, whether from your employees or your management team or your spouse or your partner? And as you create that scenario and you jot it down and you spend some time really contemplating on what that would be like, then you give that scenario to your nervous system and to your brain. Now your brain is experiencing something different from a mental perspective. So even though you didn't actually experience a peaceful environment yet, your brain the certain parts of your brain are lighting up as if you have physically been in that environment. And this has kind of been commercialized quite a bit, which is, the science of when you do think about an activity, like if you think about with athletes specifically, if they're bikers and they think about biking or they visualize biking, the same parts of your brain are going to light up as if you're biking. You're actually physically biking. So if that is true about the nervous system, which it is, then what if I gave a scenario at work or in a relationship or how I see myself as a leader or how my day is going to go? What if I give that scenario, even though it's wildly different than what I'm day-to-day experiencing? What if I give that to my brain? So now my nervous system feels safe in that next level experience. And over time, and of course it takes repetition, but over time, then I start to see more peace. Then I start to see the experiences that I have put into that sort of vision, if you would, for my day or for the working environment or for the working relationship. So that's really the concept. And I think, sort of going back to what you were talking about, the ripple effect that this has. So if I can control, and control is not really the right word I want to use, but if I can manage my own emotional state, and if I can manage my certainty about how I'm showing up in this environment, in this relationship, in this business, in this company, if I'm creating certainty around that, if I'm managing those emotions and what I'd like to experience, ultimately, there are certain things that get filtered out. There are certain people and interactions that are going to get filtered out. And more importantly, that is going to have a ripple effect on the people around me. That's going to have a ripple effect on my family members and when I come home and how I show up to my children and or, moving forward, dealing with anybody. And then, of course, the ripple effect into the entire company, into the community, and ultimately globally if I am the leader that I want, if I want to influence globally.
It's so helpful because I think that, Harvard has flagged as far as future of work, leadership core competencies that we should be focusing on right now. One of them that I have also trained a lot on in the last several months is self-awareness. And, it doesn't seem, I think that piece is so important because when we are in a workplace and there are these geopolitical shifts, and then you add on any major company changes, which are obviously happening in response to those things such as tariffs, or, then we have certain preferences around return to office, all these a myriad of different decisions that could be made. And when you have somebody in the office who is doing that hard work to visualize what is this work environment look like, and it keeps constantly changing, then it requires them to continue to do a large amount of work. And whether it's somebody that's had any kind of, trauma in their childhood, for example, like you mentioned, or any kind of workplace trauma, or just neurodiversity, where there's a lot of sensory changes in the environment. So if somebody has imagined that the smells and everything, and then suddenly when things change, you're going to be in the office 4 days a week now instead of, all of these things can be very disruptive to the workforce, especially because humans can only handle so much change. And then I think when you couple that with a lack of self-awareness of so many leaders, where somebody in the office might be very successful, very empathetic, a great leader, and somehow because of someone's lack of self-awareness, they perceive that person as a threat for whatever reason. How have you seen that show up with leadership, and how should people respond if they are suddenly that person that sees them, has become a threat, even though they didn't know it, to someone like that?
It's interesting that you say that. I think I would approach, if I was in that environment, well, first things first, I think corporations can use so much training
Yeah.
in that kind of thing, right? And I think the pendulum is swinging in that direction anyways. Companies are realizing that the focus on the individual is actually what is going to be paramount in creating impact in that company, both financially as well as general impact. How I would approach that is how I would approach how I run my household. So I have 2 little boys, and one of the rules in our house is that everyone is responsible for their own emotions, right? And so that doesn't mean that their emotions are not going to be, I'm not going to sympathize with them. I'm not going to give them tools to handle those emotions. They're not allowed to be in those emotions. By emotions, I mean any emotional state. But a rule that we have in our household is that you're still responsible for managing your own state, if that makes sense. So, for example, if my son is upset about something, right? His brother is taking something away from him and now he's upset about something. Now, could it be true that his brother did something? Yes, absolutely. Could it be true that it was a trigger and then the brother didn't do anything? Yes, that could absolutely be true. But ultimately, what matters is his emotional state. Because if he is in the emotional state of, I am angry, then not only is it going to affect other people in a negative way in that environment, but also that's not a good place to be. That's not a good place to be. So I approach my son and I say, what are the feelings you are experiencing? What are the emotions? So first step is awareness, right? So whether it's in a training or whether it's in a conversation, is, okay, well, what is it that we are experiencing? Let's make sure that you get it all out. So he gets it all out. He says, I feel angry. I say, okay. Now, would you like to stay angry for some time, right? So his feelings are valid and you could stay in anger for as long as you choose to. Or you could decide if you don't want to be angry. And if he decides he wants to stay there, then usually he gives me a timeline and he says, I need some time. Or as a matter of fact, most of the time he will choose to get out of anger. He says, no, I don't want to be angry. And then I ask him, what is it that he would like to experience? And he'll tell me what he wants to experience. Then I give him tools. So if he says, I want to be happy, or my household, gratitude is a big thing. So their go-to sometimes is gratitude, even though they're little. But okay, we'd like to be happy. Can I give you some tools? Would you like to go walk around? Would you like to play? Would you like to get creative? Would you like to channel this energy into something that is helpful for you to move that anger and move into gratitude or into happiness? And so I help them with the tools, allow them to stay in the state that they need to stay in, but also give them the tools to be able to move out of that state and into a different one. Because guess what happens? If he stays in anger, that affects the entire dynamic of our family. Is he allowed to be in anger? Absolutely, but he's going to have the tools to learn how to get out of it. Not only does that affect the entire family dynamic, but when I show up to my workplace, am I going to be the kind of boss, the kind of manager that I would normally be if I came from a happy environment or a peaceful environment or a healthy environment versus if everybody is angry at my household? So I'm going to show up differently. How's that going to have a ripple effect on my employees or on my management team or the person I talked to at the grocery store. So oftentimes we forget the possibilities that exist here just from managing our own emotional state. And I do think, I'm not in this world as much as you are, but I do think there's a lack of that level of training that focuses on the individual. And here is another sort of gem in the situation with AI. As AI is coming in, guess where the pendulum is going to go? It's going to have to go into taking care of the individual. Because now, more than ever, our needs for feeling safe and happy and peaceful and being in a healthy environment, it is so much more important than it ever has been. So it could be a plant of that seed for success, or leverage at least of, as we're making these shifts in technology.
Yeah, so good. I love that. And honestly, when we're talking about adults, so much of what we're talking about is people walking around with these, childhood versions of themselves that show up in meetings, even at executive levels, even CEOs, presidents, C-suite level leaders. There's so much going on. And I think that emotional regulation is something that is increasingly going to be important, especially when we have people more together in offices. I think in the virtual environment, some of that is a little more controlled. But then when you have a lot of, and San Francisco, I think, was the city with the highest return to office rate. So maybe we're seeing it a little bit more here. But the SHRM research has shown that incivility is on the rise in the workplace. So we are seeing, troubling signs of this really needing to be a conversation. It doesn't help when we have such political polarization, when we have even bullying on the rise in schools as well here in the United States. But I think we're seeing some elements, even in the UK and different places, there's been, just a rise in people talking to each other in very inappropriate ways, a lot of lack of compassion and some troubling signs around that, which all goes back to that self-awareness piece. It just seems as though there's a lot of quick assumptions made about people, a lot of cancel culture that is showing up in the workplace too, with people being, ousted without really fair consideration or understanding. And then the lives in and outside of work are suddenly starting to be more of a thing where you used to get a little reprieve from being away from work, but there's some trends here in Silicon Valley of this 9-9-6, like working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And so really your life outside of work, you don't get the break if there is anything going on, like in terms of these dynamics for people's nervous systems. And so it's no shock that these are the effects of that. It really is an environment for those of us who work in leadership development, talent development globally, a cause for concern, and then wondering how we have these conversations when work is busier than it's ever been. If you were working, consulting with a company, for example, and these were dynamics that were being expressed, what would be your suggestion to them in terms of learning to be more human-centered in their approaches with their employees and their workforce management?
I think I want to zoom out for a second before I even answer that question, because while I do think that all of these things that are happening as a result of the world changing and the politics and everything else that's going on, if we zoom out, I think there's always a pendulum that swings one way all the way to the extreme, and then it goes all the way back to where it needs to go. There's some level universally of, things will get really, really bad. And ultimately we get to a point where we go, this is really, really bad. Like there is no other place to go than try to bring the pendulum all the way to the other side of this. So during the pandemic, socially, we all experienced like isolation and depression and anxiety. And I think, and we're still kind of in the middle of the pendulum, I feel like, from that experience too. But all of that, those negative things that happened, at least in the social emotional aspect of things during the now we're seeing, okay, the pendulum's coming on this other side where social interactions are becoming really important. And there's other aspects to this, like social media is isolating us as humanity, right? The virtual work environments are isolating us as humanity, and we just don't know how to deal with each other, deal with humanity anymore. But it had to get really, really bad before it's starting to now, I do believe, coming to the other side, because I meet more people that want to socialize and they want to work on those communication skills. And I think AI is going to add into that the power of that pendulum as well. So while I think that we're headed the wrong way, I happen to be an optimist. So I also feel like we go to the wrong way all the way to the extreme. Again, if we zoom out, it sucks. It sucks for us in the middle of it for sure. But at some point, we're going to have to come back and go, how do we connect to one another? How do we communicate? How do we show compassion? Because we've forgotten how to do that. I mean, look at the social media and just like use of electronics now. People are using it so much so, and the addiction to that has become so extreme that now there's all kinds of programs that show you how to detox from your phone, which I think you're around my age. We didn't grow up with cell phones. So, so the pendulum's like, no, we need solutions to fix this actual problem. So there is meditations and programs where you detox from electronics or you go to a silent meditation retreat or whatever the tools are. But these things are generated as a result of this pendulum being on the other side of this. And I would say, so I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the worse it gets, the better tools we'll have to develop in order to manage those types of things. And I think in terms of how to manage and how to deal with that, I think open communication from the leadership and programs to put into place. And, I've seen it. Again, I've seen more and more of big companies coming out and saying, we need help. We recognize there is a problem, and there's a problem more than it ever has been. And now we need help and we need support. And so they'll reach out to you, they'll reach out to me, or they'll look for programs that are going to help move the culture differently, eliminate the things that are not serving in that environment, and possibly add tools for people to be able to bring that connection back, bring the empathy back, and as we move into that side of the pendulum.
I love that. Yeah, I think the more curious we get about ourselves, the more we practice self-compassion, the more we have compassion to others. The more we listen to ourselves, the more we listen to our bodies, then we want to listen to understand others as well, instead of making these assumptions that get us into a lot of trouble in our relationships by assuming people's motives or assuming something was going on that wasn't. There's just a lot, especially with AI, that can be deep faked. People's voices can be. And so we have to stay curious, even more curious than before, to listen and really understand where each other's coming from before making a huge big deal out of something that really was not that. It really is just those basic human skills of listening to understand each other. You talk a bit about, this authenticity. We love talking to authentic leaders on this podcast. And so what does really authentic, soul-aligned leadership look like in practice, and how can leaders really embody that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think authentic leadership begins with having a vision for what you would like your team and or your company to be headed. So having a vision, and I get it, most leaders will have a vision. And when I talk to my leaders, entrepreneurs, founders, one of the things that we talk about is having a vision that is completely unreasonable. So I get we set the SMART goals, or we have some inspired vision that we have for the direction of this project and or this, this team or this company or wherever we are headed. But I encourage my leaders to actually move into an out of a box idea in terms of where they're headed. And Google X, which we all know is responsible for some of the most biggest innovations in the world, like some of the things they've done we've liked and some of them we didn't like. But ultimately, they are responsible for some of the most innovative things that we are going to get to experience in the future and or experiencing right now. They found that when you have a goal for your team or for the developers in this case, 10x vision was more important than setting a 10% goal in the process. So they said, okay, if you set a 10% goal for your team, and I think this is where true leadership belongs. I mean, leadership could have to do with, okay, I'm going to give you the tools, I'm going to tell you how to do it, I'm going to have accountability and all of those things. But true leadership is about becoming a version of yourself that is going to have certainty around where you are taking this team, this project, and this company. So they found that when they set a vision that is a 10% growth vision, what happens within the team is that they stay within the box. So what they're doing is like, let's change this, let's move this around. It's always like more of the same, if you would. And when they created this whole 10X, they call it moonshot idea, when they did that, they recognized that people were actually coming up with new innovations and coming up with new ways of doing. I think the role of the leader is twofold. One is in having that vision, that moonshot vision for where we are headed. And number two, and I think more importantly, is that that leader would have to become, if they're not, most of the time they're not, they'd have to become aware of in what ways they have fallen short of that vision. Like, who do they need to become in the process and take responsibility for the ways that I am not in my current identity, in my current leadership, in alignment with this vision and where I'm headed. And recognizing that, taking radical responsibility, showing vulnerability, I think all of those are the components of authentically leading, because you're showing up with all parts of you. You have enough, you hold enough of a container for everybody to go, okay, we're certain in the direction that we are going, but you show enough vulnerability that it encourages people and your team to be able to step up and continue to do the work even when they fall short. So they follow your lead.
So great. Yeah, I think that when workloads increase, understanding that this is a team effort. And so managers, the role of a manager is to coach and to ask powerful questions, to be in touch with their distributed teams across the globe, wherever they are, and to know what's going on. And is this workload increase reasonable? And if not, where can we share this with other team members, including you as the manager, to just get it done together? And when you have this sort of top-down approach that says, get it done, I don't want to hear about it, no whining, no complaining, it just doesn't go well long-term. People have other choices, and that humanity is gone. And yes, AI is making us more productive, but in the meantime, people are still tinkering with a lot of these tools, and that adds extra time in the meantime before we figure out which ones are really going to help us the most. So we see a lot of this. It's a really great answer. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about sort of this 1 week, month lifestyle and how it can transform the way leaders really approach business.
So I have to give a little bit of a background on this one, because when we talk about 1 week a month lifestyle, it's out of context. It's like, what are you talking about? And even in context, oftentimes people are shocked by the idea. But the idea of 1 week a month lifestyle came about maybe 4 years ago for myself, which was, how can I lead my company by doing less and empowering my team members to be able to do more and want to do more and desire to take the company and kind of follow through with the vision that I had. And it kind of goes back to what we've been talking about. The version of me, the identity of me prior to this vision would be the kind of person who would sort of carry the load of my team. It would carry the load of the team. It would also carry the load of who I would have impact on, like say my clients or other businesses. So I was carrying the entire load, and that was not only a lot of pressure on myself as a leader of the company, but also when I look at my team, that kind of leader under stress was also pushing the team and having certain expectations and making sure that like you either do it or you don't do it, like just literally what you just mentioned about bad leadership. That was me. So that idea of mine was so responsible, felt so responsible, and it felt so heavy, carrying the load of my team, carrying the load of the entire company, as well as the people that I'm responsible for, both the businesses, companies I would work with, as well as my family and community and everything else. So as I'm sitting in that space, I go, well, something is not working. I'm going to have to shift this identity in such a way that is lighter for myself, which ultimately meant this is going to be a lighter environment for my team members as well. So I had to start to do less. I had to tune into what it meant to actually not carry the load, because everything I knew from childhood to building the businesses and doing the things that I had done had always meant that I had to carry the load, and it was not giving enough space for my team members and or for my companies that I would work with, for them to step up into their empowered positions. Moving from that space into, okay, how can I restructure everything where I actually show up 1 week a month and I'm fully available to my team members and to my clients and to everybody else. And then I have those 3 weeks to make sure that the vision is in place and sort of move into more of the CEO space. And since I have done this process, I will tell you that from a mechanical perspective, implementing different things in the business or with the team members or empowering them or hiring more team members to do the things, that was the easy part. The harder part about this was going back to the working on yourself, the individual self. The hardest part about this was to sit in the sit there without having to carry the load, because it almost felt like I was missing something. Sit there without having to control or micromanage my team, because that was my go-to as I was doing that. So in this process really was it was definitely challenging to me to put the things in place to kind of create space for myself, but give the space to my team to also be able to have the impact that they want to have in the company. But I think it was a lot of personal development that also developed over that period of time. So I became a whole new version of myself. And this is something that I teach leaders and CEOs is you have to step into the next level CEO that you want to be before you are there, and your team members and your people in your family or people you interact with are going to experience you completely differently in that process as well.
It's so good. Leadership, if nothing else, is about just constant transformation. This is why learning agility is another key leadership core competency in this whole future of work environment, and that adaptability. So as you increase in your own self-awareness, that you're learning not only more about yourself, but about your team, the people that, your direct reports, the people you work with. And in a distributed team, that does take a significant amount of intention to even, especially the cultural intelligence piece, which brings me to this question. You've spent some time in Italy and some other places, and you've experienced some burnout yourself. How do you feel that some of the ways people work around the world in different places have even caused you to consider different ways? Because I know Silicon Valley can be one of the worst fast-paced cultures. And I did live in Singapore. So as far as Southeast Asia, that's also a very fast-paced culture. But what I've experienced here in Silicon Valley is just very, very intense. I think New York is also something similar, and probably Washington, D.C. But I hear even somebody actually said something to me today about how they weren't planning on taking any paid time off for this entire year. And I thought, wow, I feel like it's not that the U.S. is the only place that ever says that, probably, but I've never heard it anywhere else. There's this understanding that taking time off to refresh yourself, even go on a leadership retreat, but just be away from the office actually helps you be a better leader. And I find that sometimes in the US, people glorify something that's it's not human. It's not even good for us. So have you learned anything from the Italians, from anyone else that has really influenced how you are and how you lead?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny because I mentioned to you before we hopped on here, used to live in San Francisco in the Bay Area. So I would say from my personal experience, and I've, even considering New York and DC, I would say San Francisco is on one side of the spectrum, the Silicon Valley specifically. And then I would probably say, now living half the time I live in Italy, experiencing Italy, even in Rome, having it be the place where it's kind of like the Washington, D.C. of Rome, of Italy, if you would. Even being in the center of Rome is on the opposite spectrum when it comes down to work-life balance. I mean, we take the entire month of August off in Italy. You could not be texting, calling, emailing any of your employees, not just in August, but also after hours. Everybody's done around 4 o'clock or whenever. Usually they feel like they are done. And, can't really compare the economy of the US to the economy of Italy. You can't really compare that. They're just completely wildly different. But what you can compare is health factors. What you can compare is the level of happiness that they experience. What you can compare is quality of life, and we're nowhere near where Italians or Mediterraneans are in that regard. And what I still find is that they do the things that they're supposed to do in the time that they are doing it. Like somehow time will expand to, if you have, look at it as any project, right? If you say, I'm going to get this is a 3-month project. It will take 3 months and you'll get it done. And you might even end up handling so many different things in those 3 months. But when you're going to be gone for vacation, let's say for a month, which is, I know it's unheard of in the United States, but let's say you're going to be gone for vacation for a month and you only have 2 months for this project that takes 3 months to do. Majority of Americans, not so much Italians, majority of Americans, they're going to get that project done in those 2 months before they go on vacation. Even if you look at it from a productivity perspective, it is possible for you to have a life outside of work and still be able to produce the way that you are being expected of. So that's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is shifting the culture of the always on situation, because I think I was reading a research about how 70% of the workplace are experiencing stress, anxiety, and depression, and they would qualify themselves as if they're not happy with their job or with their life. I mean, what kind of world do we live in if that's the idea? And bringing some of those Italian ways onto the west coasts of onto the Western world, or onto not the Western world, I guess the US in general, would probably not be a bad idea.
Certainly would not be a bad idea. And having traveled in Italy multiple times and in various countries that were similar, even I grew up in Venezuela. I had a lot of Italian immigration and influence. In fact, Venezuela is an Italian word. It means little Venice because it was named after Amerigo Vespucci came and named Venezuela. But yes, there's so much out there in terms of the world and how people work, and obviously comparing a smaller geographical in size country, Italy, to the United States. Like, we're a very large nation, so it is apples and oranges. But I think at the end of the day, what are we doing with our businesses and our careers if not trying to make trying to be happy and live a life that we want? And you can have happiness, and that involves being productive in your work, but there are limits to being human. And I think that the more we see ourselves pushing those limits, the more we're going to not have the results, the ROI that we're actually looking for in terms of the holistic life that we want. So thank you for sharing your insights with us today. How can people find you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm available on any of the social platforms, LinkedIn. If anybody would like to connect with me and learn more, I'm happy to connect that way. And my website, all of that, those links can also be available as well.
Well, thank you so much, Nona, for this conversation today. I really appreciate you, the work that you do, and who you are. I'm also going to have you with our Patreon community, Difference Makers, and we're going to ask you another question there. But for now, just thank you so much for your time today, and I really appreciate all that you're doing.
Thank you.
Are you on Substack? Because I am, and I'd love to connect with you there. I process things there over Saturdays and Sundays, days off, sometimes weeknights, as I'm researching and reading other articles, and it inspires me to write things where I'm going deeper into the behind the scenes of what some of the episodes on A World of Difference are all about. I'd love to connect with you there. So if you are on Substack, find me. You can go to loriadamsbrown.substack.com as a free, or I would prefer a paid subscriber, because then you get access to more of the in-depth things that are exclusively for my paid subscribers. I keep my prices as low as they can be on Substack, as low as they allow. But I do believe in being paid for my work, and I believe you should be paid for yours too. So join me there and let's make a difference together. Okay, difference makers, I know you, and I know when you hear something you really enjoyed and you learned from it, you want to share it. I am like that too, which is why I love to promote guests on this podcast for you to get to hear them yourself. Sometimes they write books, sometimes they write on Substack, sometimes they podcast, sometimes their voice is just every day in the workplace where they live and impact their communities in a variety of ways with all the hats that they wear. So if you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you did, please share it with a friend, a parent, a neighbor, somebody you went to boarding school with back in the day, somebody at work, your boss, people on your team, because this is a message they needed to hear. And it have impacted you. Please give us a 5-star rating and give us a review. It really helps our reach for more people like you to find us, the difference makers, the listeners, the leaders, the people in your communities that are making the world a better place. I appreciate you so much.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I don't know if you've heard, but Mint's premium wireless is $15 a month. But I'd like to offer one other perk. We have no stores. That means no small talk. Crazy weather we're having. No, it's not. It's just weather. It is an introvert's dream. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan. $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.